Hello everyone, my name is Hannah. Welcome to a new video. Today's video is going to be all about my reading stats this year. So if you're like me, I really like numbers and knowing how much of whatever it was that I read. Like, I like knowing how much of each genre I read, what my ratings were, and how many of each rating I gave books, and I just like the numbers and like quantifying my reading year. I know you shouldn't really care about numbers, you should care about quality over quantity, and I do, but I just like seeing the numbers and like having it laid out for me so I can see exactly what I did this year, what I read this year. So I make a journal spread every year that does all of that gives me numbers to the things that I'm curious about, and that's what I'll be talking about in this video. So the big number that everybody is curious about is how many books did I read this year? And I read 173 books this year. So last year I thought was kind of a fluke because I read 177 books and I have never broken 100. And I thought, maybe that was just a really good reading year. I was home a lot more because of the pandemic, so I thought maybe that's why I read so much more, but I managed to read over 170 books again this year. I'm 4 shy of what I read last year, but like 173 books, that's pretty incredible, especially when my reading goal is 52 books. Every year, that's what I set it at. And last year was the first year where I actually thought that I could read 100, so I changed my Goodreads reading challenge thing to 100 books, and of course I surpassed that, which was awesome. But yeah, 173 books I read this year. Now, I read less books this year than last year, but I read more pages. So this year I read 60,767 pages roughly, because that's not counting the books that I DNF'd, which I did DNF quite a few books this year, so all the pages that I read for that, it's not counting that, which I don't even know if I could estimate. Some of the books I read well over 100 pages into, and I DNF'd a lot, so I would say probably another like 1,000 pages that isn't counted in that. But last year I read somewhere around 55,000 pages, so I read 5,000 more pages this year, even though I read 4 less books. So I just think like the length of the books that I was reading this year was longer than the length of the books I was reading last year. The shortest book that I read this year was The Deal of a Lifetime by Frederick Bachman. This comes in at 65 pages. It is very short and it has like illustrations on it even, so it's probably even shorter than 65 like actual reading pages. But yeah, this one is just a teeny tiny little novella. This was the shortest book I read. The longest book that I read this year was Priory of the Orange Tree, and that was 827 pages, so it was quite the thick, chunky book. And then Goodreads says my average book length was 352 pages. So that's like a pretty average book length, I feel like. Anything between 300 and 400 feels like a very average book length. So yeah, that makes sense to me. I'll also say my favorite and least favorite books of the year. So my favorite book, if you watch my favorites video, you already know this, but my favorite book of the year was A Court of Silver Flames by Sarah J. Maas. I love this book so much. It's another chunky one. It probably almost made the longest book of the year. 751, so not quite. Another 100 pages and it would have had it, but favorite book of the year. And then my least favorite book of the year was hands down Moonshot by Alessandra Torre. This was the one that I messaged Jan on Instagram and ranted to her for so long in a message that Instagram was like, you need to be done. And it cut me off, so I had to send another message because I was just so mad. I don't like that book. That's one that I DNF'd, and if I was gonna rate it, it would be a 1 star, -1 if I could. So like I said, I DNF'd a lot of books this year. I DNF'd 14 books, and that might sound like a lot or it might sound like a little, depends on who you are. To me, it sounds like not that many because I do not have time to waste on books that I am not enjoying. Not, gonna sit there reading a book for 200 pages, 300 pages, 400 pages until I finally decide I'm gonna give it a bad rating because I didn't like it. If I'm not liking it, I just don't read it. Like, I don't have time for that. So yeah, you'll see when I get to my ratings and how many of each star rating I gave, like why that's kind of important. But anyways, moving on. I also reread a lot this year. I reread more this year than I reread last year. But I reread 31 books this year. And to me, that sounds like the right amount. Like that's like, I feel like I reread 31 books. I love to reread. I don't mind like spending time on rereads because they're my favorites. Like I reread my favorite books. So I know I'm gonna love them. They're very comforting, and I'm still reading and I'm still enjoying myself. So yeah, 31 rereads this year. All right, I also have my number of books left on my physical TBR at the end of the year. I had a goal this year to try to keep my physical TBR 5 or less books, and I think I only achieved it like 2 or 3 months of the year. But I'm ending the year with 5 physical books, or 5 books on my physical TBR, which is what I wanted. And I'm still gonna kind of strive for that, but I just won't beat myself up if I have more than 5 books, because then I have more selection. But yeah, I really want to be reading the books that I'm buying. I don't want them to just sit on my shelf for years and eventually maybe I'll lose interest in them. I want to buy the books that I'm interested in reading right at that moment. I also have in this little chart the number of books I have on my Goodreads TBR, my want to read list on Goodreads. This one is not as like cool of a number to me. I have 35 books on my Goodreads want to read list. That changes all the time because I'll be adding books if I hear them recommended and on someone else's channel, or if I see them on Instagram and somebody compares them to a book that I love, I just add them. And then sometimes I'll scroll through and I'll like decide which books I've lost interest in. Not saying that I won't ever read those books, but that I'm just like not wanting to read them at the moment, so they just go off that list. So yeah, this one's not like a cool number or anything, but I have it on my chart. Now I have the books that I read physically versus the books that I read audibly. So I love audiobooks. I listen to audiobooks all the time. I have 4 different apps that I use for listening to audiobooks. But yeah, I read 63 books physically and I read 110 books audibly. And I'm including the books that I read, like a combination of the two, where I like read it physically while following along, or like read it, wait, what am I trying to say? I listened to the audiobook while following along with the physical book, so I was still like had the book in my hand. A lot of times what'll happen is like I'll follow along and read the book physically, and then if I go driving somewhere, I'll listen to the audiobook so I can keep going with that story. So I counted all of those in the audibly listened category. Then I have it split up here by age category, so young adult versus adult. I'm just curious to see where my reading like trend is going. I personally feel like I'm reading more adult books and less young adult books. That's where I feel like my reading has gone over the last couple years. And I am seeing that here with these numbers. So I read 25 young adult books this year, and I read 148 adult books. And I'm classifying the adult books as like anything that's like new adult and up. Even nonfiction books I classified as adult. So yeah, I can just see from those numbers that I'm tending to want to pick up more adult books. All right, now let's get into my ratings. So I have here what Goodreads says my average rating is, and every year that I see that, I'm like, wow, that's actually pretty high. Like, am I not that picky? But I think it's for a couple reasons. So my average rating on Goodreads is a 4.1 stars. And I think the main reasons for that is it counts all of my rereads, which all of my rereads tend to be 5-star books. So that's already like skewing it because, like I said, I reread 31 books, and all of those, some of them even like double dipped if I read them twice in the year. I know Punk 57 I read 3 times this year, so that's 3 5-star ratings. And A Court of Silver Flames I read more than once, and those, it counts, like it just keeps adding up those 5 stars. And also I don't rate my DNFs. If I started rating the books that I DNF'd, and because I would rate them lower because they were like not good enough, like my enjoyment was not high enough for me to rate them high, they would be like 1 or 1.5 star reads. So I don't rate my DNFs since I didn't actually finish the book. So the lower like ratings on the scale, there's like none. So it's already like tending to skew higher to the 5-star reads. And I'm not mad about it. Like, my average rating is a 4.1. That just means that I have enjoyed most of the books that I read this year, which is awesome. I know my reading taste and I know what I like, so I'm picking up books that I know I'm going to like. So yeah, I'm really happy with my average rating. All right, there are 4 books that I decided not to rate at all this year. I'm guessing most of those are nonfiction books that it just feels like kind of weird to rate those. Like if it's someone's memoir, it doesn't feel right to rate that, or to like, I don't know, to say what my enjoyment of their memoir is. So I just don't rate those. So 4 no ratings. I have 0 1-star ratings and 0 1.5-star ratings. Like I said, if I did rate my DNFs, those numbers would be higher, but I don't rate them. So maybe I should. Let me know in the comments if you think I should rate my DNFs, or if I should keep it, since I didn't finish the book, I shouldn't get a say in the rating. All right, I had 8 2-star reads and 5 2.5-star reads. So 13 books that I did not really enjoy, but they were good enough that I could finish the book. That's usually what I give like a 2-star rating. Like Priory of the Orange Tree, I didn't like that book, but I was able to finish it. I mean, if I wasn't buddy reading it with Ashley, I probably would have DNF'd it because I wasn't really enjoying it, but I was able to finish it and there were some good parts in it. So yeah, that's kind of where I rate 2 stars. I had 14 3-star reads and 2 3.5-star reads. So 16 books that were very middle of the road. They were good, they weren't great, nothing to write home about, but they were pretty decent. So that's those. I had 67 4-star ratings. So that is my highest number, like for a rating. I rated the most books this year 4-star reads, which is good. It means I enjoyed them. They just weren't like out of this world amazing for me, but they were really, really, really good books. I have 10 4.5-star ratings. So they were really good, better than a 4-star, but not quite like at the level that I need them to be to give them a 5-star. Sometimes I think like I'm being too picky with the 4.5 stars. Like if it's at that point, just give it a 5-star. But I am also like, I don't want to be just handing out 5 stars like candy at a parade. But I feel like I do that anyways because I have 63 5-star reads. So just shy of like meeting the highest number of ratings. So again, I reread 31 books this year, so most of those, if not all, were 5-star reads. And then I also found a lot of new favorites this year. Like Punk 57 was the first time I read that, and I read it 3 times, so it counted for 5 stars 3 times. A Court of Silver Flames was my favorite, so I read that twice. I reread the Blood and Ash series. Like I read it the beginning of this year, that's when I picked it up, and then I loved it so much that I read it again. So again, that's like double dipping. So I feel like now I'm just trying to justify the fact that I have a lot of 5 stars, but I don't really need to because I had a great reading year. I loved a lot of books. All right, moving on to the genres. I love looking at these numbers because it's just really interesting to see like how many of each genre I read this year. I already know that I read a ton of romance this year. There were months and months and months that all I wanted to do was read romance. And I thought that this number was going to be so much higher than any other number, and it is the highest one, but only by 1 book. The other highest genre, which surprised me because I didn't think that I read that much, was fantasy. And fantasy is my favorite genre if I had to pick one. And I read 50 fantasy books this year, which seems really high because I thought it would be way less than that. But I read 50 fantasy books this year. And I read 51 romance books this year. So romance did come out on top here as my most read genre this year, which is not surprising to me in the least because I read so much romance. Yeah, I am surprised that I read 50 fantasy books, which I am happy with since, like I said, it's my favorite genre. I am now back in a fantasy reading mood, so 2022 is going to start off with, starting off with a lot of fantasies. All right, magical realism books. I read about 15 magical realism books. I read 6 sci-fi books. That is not my genre. Like, I don't usually read sci-fi books, but I picked up the Murderbot Diaries this year, which is a very sci-fi novella series. So that's why that number is like higher to me than normal, even though it's only 6, but still. I read 11 contemporary. I read 15 thrillers or mysteries. I kind of just lumped that category together because they're pretty similar. I read 5 horror books this year, which is higher than usual because I'm not usually a horror reader, but the ones that I read this year, I actually really enjoyed. So maybe that's something that I need to check out more. I only read 2 historical fiction / classics. So I read Pride and Prejudice this year, which I didn't want to make a whole category for classics and have it just be 1 book. And then I didn't want to make a whole category for historical fiction and have it just be 1 book. So I just lumped them together. I did make a category for poetry though, which I don't know why I did that because it's just 1 book. I could have just lumped it in with nonfiction, which was 4 books. I read 4 nonfiction. And now this last one is graphic novels, which I know isn't a genre. It's just like a type of like media, but I'm interested every year to know how many graphic novels I read rather than splitting them up into the genre categories. So I put it in this section just because, even though I know that it's not a genre, but I read 13 graphic novels this year, which is way less than last year. I think I read over 40 last year. This year I just did not read as many. And some of the ones that I did read were rereads for me. And then finally, the last like numbers that I have here are how many books I read each month. So I have this little like bar graph here of how many books that I read each month, which I think is really cool to add a visual to what those numbers are. So in January, I read 13 books. February, I read 9 books, which was my least amount that I read in a month. So February is the shortest month, but only by like a couple days. So it really wouldn't have, I don't know what happened in February, but yeah, 9 books. In March, I read 17 books. April, I read 16. May, I read 14. June, I read 13. July, I read 19, which I think that's mostly because of Summerween happened in July, and I went on vacation to like a lake house, and all we did all week was like sit by the lake and read. August, I read 20 books. That was my highest reading month in August. September, I read 13, so it dropped quite a bit, but that's when the school year started for me, so it makes sense because I was working full-time then and busy. October, I read 15 books, and then November and December, I read 12 books in each month, which is kind of funny. So yeah, those are all of my numbers to wrap up the year, to quantify my reading year, to add a visual, add a number to what I read. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know some of your stats down below. I find them so fascinating, or even like tell me if you have one, like a video like this on your channel, because I would love to come and watch it. I just love seeing that kind of stuff. But yeah, thank you again so much for watching, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.